41% of younger employees are actively sabotaging their own company's AI initiatives.
How?
They're not using the tools or disabling the tools. 35% of staff using AI tools that they pay for. Well, that's great. That means they're using stuff that is not corporately authorized and not under the corporate security envelope. Ultimately, we're going to see a broader shift from skill to competence, where relatively newer employees using AI-based systems to perform tasks that are at or even a little bit beyond their current skill level threshold.
Hi, everyone. It's Daniel Kube here, CEO of ServicePath, and we're doing another edition of Executive Conversations. And today I have an old friend and not colleague, but we've done work in the past, Mike O'Neill. And Mike is one of the people I would categorize as what I would call a deep thinker. And he thinks about a lot of big challenges in the world, but he also has a really great history. And he's also really relevant to our customer base because we really focus on tech-enabled businesses. And Mike has been counseling and assisting and giving input to some of the world's largest tech-enabled businesses. And more recently, he's been really a deep subject matter expert, probably in the data center world globally with some of the largest data centers. But he also has a really cool evolution and career. So Mike, with that said, I'd love for you to maybe share how you got started. And, how did you end up where you are? And then, later on, it would be great to dovetail into a couple of your key things you're super passionate about. One, zero trust. And then two, how do you help, non-technical leaders deal with these things, especially in this new world of, rates of change we've never even seen before. And they seem to be, changing and amplifying, every day now, as opposed to every month or every year. Anyways, a couple questions there. Look forward to your comments.
I think you and I might have met when I was still at IDC. I was with IDC for almost 20 years and went from being one of the guys on the phone doing telephone interviews to managing director for Canada, member of the Global Strategic Planning Group, and responsible for the only research program headquartered outside the US, which is the Worldwide Software Partnering and Alliances Program, through which we helped very large software companies around the world to deal with very large customers around the world in terms of how they brought together ecosystems to do that. That ecosystem thread has really kind of continued through my career. With my partner, Mary Allen, I founded Inside AAS, 15 years ago, thereabouts. And we really dug heavily into the idea of community-based research, where we work to assemble groups of experts, people who know things in different areas, starting with cloud and moving on to big data analytics. And it's an approach I've continued with subsequently in cybersecurity with a former employer, SHI Stratoscale, where I was a member of the office of the CISO for a $14 billion plus business. And more recently with the Uptime Institute, which, as you hinted, serves the world's largest data center providers. And there I've been, again, assembling a coalition working on AI and data center operations. So yeah, lots of twists from cloud to analytics to sustainability in there. And more recently, cybersecurity, where I've doubled down as a mentor for the Rogers Cybersecurity Catalyst, trying to help Canadian innovators to bring their products to market. And now with Uptime, working with the data center community.
So, given your career progression, it just keeps building on itself and the knowledge and the sharing. What were your key learnings like 20 years ago that are applying today? Or has everything changed so much that you're not reusing any of your legacy knowledge? Like, what are the patterns, or are the patterns just being totally thrown out?
They're evolving, changing. I think life is becoming, I don't know if you want to call it more complicated or more sophisticated or what have you, but our entire industry and the industries that it serves have become more demanding, more complicated over time. The channel and alliance thing is a really good example of that, right? When I started doing research into that 20 odd years ago, we talked about channels where a vendor of products dealt with a reseller who had a customer relationship, who integrated that product maybe with a few others, and that was the solution for the customer. And the customer accepted that as a solution because the use of technology was pretty constrained, and that's kind of how you bought it. And over time, buyers have gotten, have grown up with technology, have gotten way more savvy with technology, have applied technology through digitalization in many different areas. And the supply chain has had to evolve similarly, right? So, understanding the mechanics of a hub and spoke channel ecosystem is kind of irrelevant now. I mean, ecosystems are N way, they're flexible, and they deal with what customers demand in terms of, composable applications that reach flexibly into all aspects of their business based on composable infrastructure that reacts in turn to those application demands. And that's all in service of customers who've come to expect that their suppliers will have instant reactions to whatever it is that they want, wherever they are in the world, and will manage to do so, mitigating security risk at the same time. So
So
yes,
is that kind
it's
of like,
trend.
is that analogous to like EDI of the 80s is now going to become AI enabled and the agents will basically self-serve each other and you're just going to blindly trust them?
I really hope nobody blindly trusts anything that an agent is. It's zero trust that you mentioned is built on the mantra of trust but verify. And
Yeah.
the pace at which AI moves versus the pace at which people understand its motion, there's a pretty big gap there. So there's maybe more trust than verification in a lot of cases. My current AI interest is entirely in the field of OT, so operational technology. So if you look at a data center, it's got a whole bunch of white space where computers do compute things, and another section of gray space where power and cooling stuff lives. And that's analogous to really any OT economy business, right? What you find in manufacturing or in power generation, distribution, healthcare in a lot of ways, that sort of thing. And in there, AI is certainly a lot less trusted than it is in the circles you were talking about. It's because these guys don't get paid
Yeah.
on pace of change, and they especially wouldn't appreciate the phrase "move fast and break things." That would just get you fired in this community. So
Yes.
yeah,
Because
lots
that
less
means
trust,
downtime
lots
and
more
mission critical system.
examination.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's a really great, scenario. And you work with some of the largest data center providers in the world, like, top 10, top 5, top 3. And given how AI, it's actually phoenixed on-prem, right? Because now there's this whole group of people who want to air gap, set up private clouds or their own systems. And like, for example, Mac minis are sold out globally because everyone's using, OpenClaw and they want to have their own standalone instance that they're going to stand up on their own. Do you think that has been good for the data center world? Because there hasn't always been massive consolidation and everyone said everything's moving to the cloud. And that was probably the direction literally up until 7 months ago. But now I think you're beginning to see growth rates of back to the old prem virtual, solo cloud. Like, what do you think that's going to do to the market?
I mean, the cloud lives in data centers, right? So it's that's a really hard line to draw. And lots of clouds live in colo facilities and lots of enterprises live in colo facilities. So, there are specific examples on both sides, especially in the enterprise side, right? Where there are lots of enterprise specific data centers and there's lots of shared infrastructure around. I mean, at a macro level, the demand inside data centers is whatever the demand is for Mac minis. The demand inside data centers is skyrocketing, right? Like if you take a long view of rack density, so how much power does a single compute rack in a data center draw? I mean, over the last 15, 20 years, that's gone from 4 kilowatts to 6 to 8 to 10 to 12. Now, more advanced facilities are doing like 20. And the theory is that you can get to about 40 before you completely break the infrastructure that these things run in. But NVIDIA is asking for like 200 now and way more in like 2 or 3 years. And, data center operators are saying, well, that requires an entirely different approach to what it is we've always done. And one guy said to me, look, if I have a data hall, right, a room in my data center that has a megawatt of power, and so I got 110 kilowatt racks in there, right? And you say, no, I need 200 kilowatt racks now. I can put 5 of them in. I probably can't cool them, but I can at least power 5. But you say, no, I mean, 95% of your floor space is vacant. I want to put some stuff there too. It's like, there's nothing to plug it into. There's no more power. You have to reconfigure how power comes in. And there's a lot of political, social, and other pushback on that. You have to reconfigure how you cool this stuff. You have to, I mean, the entire industry is heading towards a change that over all of those years it never had to confront. And so, I mean, that's AI on the demand side. And then on the supply side, how do you use it to get better optimization of the systems that you've deployed to deliver power, to deliver cooling, to integrate operations in such a way that you can actually manage and secure them? I mean, that's another whole set of questions, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you actually think, like, for example, with the frontier models, there's a lot of discussion how some of the Chinese frontier models or open source models are way more power efficient. Are you seeing that with your customers who are picking up these different LLMs just because they can put more of them in because they don't consume the calories, like, for example, of, Claude? Has there been any
There's
arbitrage on that front?
there's a fair amount of debate as to whether the gap that is described there actually exists. And I'm not the guy who should be answering the question as to what goes on behind the scenes on that. So
Yeah, yeah.
I probably wouldn't be the right person
But are
to
your
comment on
customers
that.
thinking about that kind of stuff?
Mainly, if you talk to our customers about AI power demands, they're wondering how, as we move past training and into inference engines, how that alters the power demand profile. Because not only is training hugely resource intensive, but it's also really spiky. So it disrupts infrastructure, not just data center infrastructure, but the utilities infrastructure in erratic ways that may well end up shortening life cycles of the stuff that it plugs into. The thought is that inference will be a little bit more conservative with respect to power draw and a lot more consistent in terms of power draw. But one thing people seem to be trying to look past is, can you stop training once you've deployed an inference, or is training an ongoing responsibility so that your model evolves as people's expectations of what your model can do evolves? And I don't think anyone has really good answers for either of those questions at this point. I see a lot of speculation on that, but I see a lot of people saying, oh, yes, the hard data says X and not Y.
So you help, like, a lot of these large data centers figure out some complex challenges. And there's a lot of large enterprises who are not data center specialists. Like, how do you arm the boards of those organizations who have to work with these large vendors? What should they be concerned about? What kind of questions would you be saying, hey, you need to understand this, Mr. Layman, moving forward to really make sure you're protecting yourself? And that kind of ties back to your zero trust concept, because trust but verify sounds great, but the problem is the list of verifications seems to be increasing exponentially. And at one time or one point, you're going to get fatigue from verifying, or it's not capable to actually turn an SLA in an appropriate, like, how do you address those kind of challenges? And what counsel do you give to, like, organizations that are not these techniques? And I'm sure that equally applies, right? Because we're seeing massive proliferation of MCP. And the trust but verify, especially when the LLM is dynamically asking you to integrate with systems you've never heard before, but you have this implicit trust. I mean, that's happening everywhere, right? And we're
Yeah,
trying to, yeah.
I think implicit trust is an oxymoron.
Anyways,
I
love
mean,
your thoughts there.
and the scale of those demands is skyrocketing. I mean, people tend to think of users as people, but the majority of users, and increasingly the majority of users, are not people, right? They're
Agents or bots.
autonomous. Yeah, they're bots. They're autonomous things. They're devices. They're bots. They're whatever, that either are looking to input data, or input process and output data. And those, the scale of that is definitely going to slow down whatever infrastructure you put in place to deal with it. So, I mean, that will be a real challenge. But I mean, beyond that, right, there's a point at which you have to make a balance between what it is, the amount of risk you're prepared to tolerate or accept versus your willingness to invest in mitigating that risk. And, on the one hand, every board says, oh, we don't want any risk. We want zero risk. So, if that wasn't one of your options, what is an acceptable level? And, maybe we can do this as like a financial equation instead. If the risk is 1 and the cost of mitigating it is 100, you'd accept that risk, right? If the risk is 100 and the cost of mitigating, and so on and so forth, right? And you end up with, kind of a continuum where you accept some risk, you try to re-architect to avoid risk, like isolate systems or otherwise address through architecture the isolation of some of your risks, which you can do more easily with non-human actors than human actors in a lot of cases. If you have a serious overage of risk, you may insure that, although insurance is not typically a solution to risk management. And then whatever's left, you have to invest in mitigating, right? And the other side of that is your controls have to be reasonable for the users, because if they aren't, the users just find their own way around the constraints. And if they're doing their own thing, then your whole security bubble doesn't work anymore. There's a great study out now on AI, actually, which has the same problem, from writer.com that says 35% or thereabouts of staff, rather than management, using AI tools, use their own tools that they pay for. Well, that's great. That means they're using stuff that is not corporately authorized and not under the corporate security envelope, and feeding into it proprietary data that could show up on a Mac Mini near you.
Yeah.
Really, it's a suboptimal outcome. So, you know, if management says we will not, if management says we will invest heavily in controls and the security team says we're going to lock everything down, then the users avoid the constraints. If management says we aren't going to invest appropriately so that our controls are inadequate or slow, then the users still avoid the infrastructure. So you need to strike a reasonable balance, and that requires the security head, the CISO, to do a good job of cyber risk quantification, to identify what the exposure and what the costs of managing that exposure are. And it requires the senior leadership team to be a little realistic about what risk they will accept and not just take none as their default answer.
Yeah, and we began to see some of these really bad situations with some security penetration going on. And I was talking to one of our devs this week, and I was talking about how in Claude you can build a skill, and there's lots of these skills that are now available and discoverable. And some bad actors have already put malware in these skills, but they seem so amazing and sexy. People are just downloading them. And he goes, yeah, that's just like when we used to have that app called Elf Bowling in the 90s. I guess there was this app that went everywhere in the 90s and everyone played it. And people knew there was malware in it, but they loved the game so much that they just kept on playing it, and it caused so many breaches. Anyways, it's
That same survey, by the way, and this is the one finding that I always emphasize because it turns the folks in my audience pale, says that 41% of younger employees are actively sabotaging their own company's AI initiatives.
wow. Like how?
They're not using the tools, they're disabling the tools.
Interesting. Is that because they don't like it, or they're doing,
41%.
but doing it knowingly or
Oh, yeah.
unknowingly? Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Sabotaging. Often, I mean, based on what I've seen, there's two main reasons for that. One is job loss fear. And, in the data center industry, we say, look, AI is not going to take away jobs from technicians and operators. Technicians and operators who can use AI will take away jobs from those that can't. And the growth of those staff positions will be lower than the capacity growth in the same facilities. But in other industry
Wow.
sectors, that's just not the case. Lots of people are facing job losses and they know AI is responsible for it and they're trying to impede it. And then the other problem is, and this is specific to the research I've done, but I think it can be abstracted into other environments as well, is there's a really strong divergence between top-down AI strategy and tool implementation and bottom-up implementation of tools that help current employees perform current tasks better. And the top-down imposition, people tend to ignore it, avoid it, try to scuttle it. The bottom-up stuff, if you work with your employees, that can work, and a lot of them can become champions for AI. But you have to invest the time up front in the people, not just, thou shalt dictates from on high and hope for the best when it hits the shop floor or, the office tower.
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of thinking about this, and I think organizationally, when you think about the way organizations build like security, like your SOC 2, like we've gone through the process every year. We review our policies. We've created some policies now that are AI enabled to think about, validated true plugins that we use from a skill perspective in Claude and saying these are approved, do not use anything else. We've updated, our manuals saying, hey, if you're going to bring your own LLM, these are the considerations. Make sure you have the do not train settings on, all those kind of things. But I think the one thing organizations are missing, because they're not thinking about the way people have acquired their AI knowledge. Because the belief used to be our developers came from a school, that school had trained them up on, object-oriented programming or whatever it may be, or the latest and greatest. And they come to us and they're already up to speed on common principles and like that are really important to this subject. The rate of change in AI has happened so fast, those traditional methods of people learning things no longer apply because the organizations can't keep up and they have wait. So my whole thesis here is, as an organization, you need to baseline your teams because people have a bias to the tools they use. They might be GPT, they might be Claude, they might be Cursor, whoever, but they are all nuanced and different. And also the way they applied their best practices, they kind of learned them ad hoc. So while we have created consistency in our security approach and thought, we have no understanding of how to get our teams all rowing in the right motion and also following a good practice. So I'd love your comments on that. And how do you mitigate that?
I mean, and that kind of opens up a couple of different doors. If you give me just a second, there was one I wanted to start with. I need to roll back to what it was you were saying. Oh, right. So, I mean, one of the doors you open is a management door, right? So, talking to a fellow yesterday, he said, listen, I can go onto the web, even with like a fairly modest, Mac Mini type engine, and find source code for most big companies. And it's because the security envelope is designed to leak source code. It's because the developers are being told, we've upped your quotas. We want you to develop more software in less time now. And you have AI tools to help you with that. And so, I mean, you're right. I mean, what needs to happen is you need to instill training and best practices. But what happens is you get a top down mandate. People react as they will. The successful ones do figure out how to use AI to write code faster, but you might be unhappy with the process that goes through to get there.
Your competitor might be very happy though.
And the other is, and I don't know if this is true everywhere, but it's certainly true in OT. So there are two things there, but specific to people, the people who are really good at managing physical infrastructure and in data centers and power plants and you name it, are older typically. They just are because they've developed skills over the years. They're older. They're starting to age out of the workforce, and retirement's a big deal for those staffs, right? The pool of newcomers, at least in data centers, is viewed as thinner than it used to be. Harder to find good, qualified people who are interested in building a career over time in that trades kind of environment. At the same time, demand is going up because the infrastructure is getting more complicated. And at the same time, the early and the latter tasks, like the beginning tasks that used to be used to train people, are being automated out. So you have fewer potential members, you have fewer potential people being trained, and you have learn by doing system that's broken because the early doing rungs are disappearing from the latter. And that's changing the nature of how you train people and how those people perform tasks, right? So the training is shifting from on the job, almost, mentoring on the job, hand holding over time to quite a lot more classroom focus or digital twin type experimentation or that sort of thing to allow people who don't have advanced skills to start understanding how the now automated tasks are performed And then ultimately, and this is something, I might be the only person saying this now, but I won't end up there. Ultimately, we're going to see a broader shift from skill to competence. There just aren't going to be enough skilled people, especially in brand new technologies, to do all of the tasks around that. So you'll have relatively newer employees using AI based systems to perform tasks that are at or even a little bit beyond their current skill level threshold. And as that takes root, the key qualification for moving up the ladder shifts from acquiring skills needed to intuitively fix a problem to
Yeah.
acquiring competency in using AI to show you how to fix that same problem.
Yeah. And that's great until you have a catastrophic breakdown, because the problem is you've reduced the workforce. And when there's a catastrophic breakdown, you don't have enough resources to go solve that. And the only reason I say that is I put myself through university working on the BC ferries. And so I used to have to work in the cafeteria serving these things called sunshine breakfasts. And I was paid, but the reason why I was there, not because I had to be in the cafeteria, it was when the boat sunk, you needed people to put people in the lifeboats. You had a minimum requirement, right? But they said, "Oh, we have a revenue stream. We can turn these people into cleaners or whatever." So, but but our primary goal wasn't for, when things are going well. It was when things went really, really bad and you had to get people in lifeboats. And I think that might become a cross industry phenomenon now, because with AI, everything goes swimmingly well. But unless you're prepared to staff up when things go catastrophically wrong, you're going to be in a lot of trouble.
Well, and I get it. I'm a regular on the Chi Mon, so thank you for telling me that. I'll be sure to tip my servers appropriately moving forward, knowing that they're the ones who will give me a seat if I need one in the lifeboat. And one of the guys I talked to on the way through this thing said, "We don't get paid to do stuff. We get paid to fix stuff when things go really wrong, and they might never go wrong, but if they do, somebody needs to be."
Exactly.
And yeah, I mean, but staffing is getting thinner across every function, and these are no different from that. And
Yeah.
you see people. We just did a roundtable a couple of weeks ago on restore time objectives, RTOs, and mean time to restore or repair, MTTRs, and there are some pretty aggressive targets. Some of that relies on in-house staff. Some of that relies on proximity, which is hard if you're in a ferry, but easier if you're in a data center near where your
Yeah.
employees live. And some of it depends on supply chain. And our suppliers have a 2-hour MTTR SLA, so we can do 4 hours and feel okay about that. But those are getting iffier and iffier. Supply chains are not getting better through time, and they're not going to get better anytime soon.
No, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, if you have nothing to replace a broken product with, like, the only option is wait.
And right now, for generators, for example, and some of our clients have hundreds and hundreds of generators, and they're really large, and the replacement time at this point is 2 years.
Wow.
So you really want to maintain them, because if they blow up, you can't repair them.
Wow. Yeah, crazy. So one of the things I know, and this isn't in our discussion topic that I pre-briefed you on, but I know you're kind of a subject matter expert in it in your own right. And so for those who don't, Mike has a beautiful cottage, and I did this trivia and your island is the largest island in a lake in the world.
Right. And we have the largest lake on an island in a lake in the world, and the largest island in a lake on an island in a lake.
But one of the things that because I have a passion project as well, the electrification and going off grid, you have real passion for this. How did you come by this going off grid and becoming this solar guru?
I don't know if I'm a guru. I think I might have gotten the longest failure notice ever from the electrical authorities. A page and a half in fine print of stuff that I had done wrong. But other people are happy enough to help you. And when all goes wrong, you get a generator to back you up. So
if you can get one.
Actually, here in the city, we have geothermal heat too. So
Okay.
we're really into those alternative sources for stuff.
So, one thing, just on that note of like going off grid and like the next wave of impactful technologies, I was watching a video on X this week of in China. And as you know, China is creating some of the largest hydro infrastructure to support all their compute and all the great things that they're doing. And China is always great in constraint-based situations, right? They figure out, okay, since we can't do this, and the current environment in China in the X article, it said something like they're currently short 40,000 electricians. They have no ability to get them, but they've now begun to automate with robots the elevated high power connections. And then there's this really crazy video, and basically before you used to have to suit up in like armor.
Right.
So basically, so if you get shocked, it passes through so you don't die. So it's a really dangerous job. But they created this robot that actually goes up on this thing and it basically does all the wiring, and no one dies and it's 50% faster. So is that going to impact data? Are they going to take these jobs, or are they just so skilled? Like, what do you see?
That's a great use case. And you see that in North America in mining, where, if you can send a drone underwater stuff, if you can send a drone in rather than a human being, that's a lot better. Yeah, I mean, if you talk, one of the 5 working groups we had as part of the AI initiative with Uptime was focused on guardrails. And if you look at their objectives, the top rung, and there isn't another rung anywhere near it, but human life and safety is at the top and everything. So how do we ensure that whatever it is that we're doing protects against people getting zapped by the very, very high voltage that runs through this entire facility, right?
Yeah.
So do people trust robots to do that today in a data center? Hell no, definitely not. And the reason for that is, in China, you got a need to electrify and you've got a shortage of electricians. In a data center, you've got a guy who runs a data center whose job security is tied directly to never going down. So any innovation that might save money or speed things up or whatever, but could result in something going down is not going to get a lot of traction because the guy running the data center doesn't get bonused on faster, but he does get fired for downs.
Yes. So you do a lot of different things, and so how can people pick your brain? Like, do you have, like, how can people engage with you? Because you think deeply about a lot of things that are really relevant to enterprises today. And
I just launched a new site, business, whatever, last week. It's ugly, but I'm graphically incompetent, as anybody who's ever seen my slide presentations knows. But I mean, it offers you the ability to reach out and ping me if you'd like to talk about stuff. And it provides kind of guided curriculum that the need for which, I mean, I've been doing stuff along those lines for decades. I've traveled all over the world doing channel and alliance workshops and go-to-market workshops and then ecosystem workshops as the industry evolved. But in my work mentoring early stage firms at Rogers Cybersecurity Catalyst, it's become evident that, not that it wasn't already, but it's become evident that innovators, engineers who found businesses tend to allocate less 100% of their resources of time, energy, and money into engineering. And then hope that somebody with a logo will validate their incredible invention by buying it. And that's just not really the way that works. Somewhere in that same website, co-creatingprofit.com, if you're interested, is a description of how that process works. And also just a note that if you want to talk about AI or cybersecurity, something like that, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah. Another topic before we close that I know you have some definite opinions on, and that's sovereignty. Like, what are your data providers? Because you work with some of the largest who host all the mega clouds. And, does AWS Canada, is that check your box for Canadian data sovereignty? Or like, what's your vision, or what do you think we should be doing there?
Let me approach that another way. Most of the stuff I've written through time, the cloud books, bestseller on the Executive Guide to Zero Trust, on cybersecurity, the book Analytics in a Business Context, and the stuff I've done more recently on AI, has all been more or less crowdsourced, right? It's community-based research where I speak with people who know things and they help me to understand. They don't need to understand like the whole topic, right? If they understand a thing really well, that's great, I saw that you were going to ask me about sovereignty, so I contacted someone who knew more about sovereignty than I do. Not someone with a data center, someone with a government entity that might have an interest. And I believe your question is this a commercial constraint? And this person's response was, should be an opportunity because it requires those firms to build out additional capacity that's local to. I mean, speaking plainly, there's a dichotomy right now when you look at sovereignty through a Canadian lens or anybody's lens. You have global providers who have incredible capabilities and are not particularly responsive to local sovereigns. you have local providers who are really responsive to local sovereigns, but don't have anything like that level of capability. And what the sovereigns are trying to accomplish is a blend of those two things. And the feedback, and it made sense to me, was you can compel or at least coerce or encourage global providers to deploy global class stuff that has local control, ownership if necessary, in your sovereign area. You will probably have to backstop that as the sovereign financially. Like they're not going to make a financial bet on you because you say you really want them to. But if you make the business case for why they would do that, you're likely to get at least some of them who will respond positively. And then, in the short term, that might lead to excess capacity. But both the trend in data center, vacancy and, Jevons paradox, it says no, capacity goes unused for very long, suggests that, if you build it, they will in fact come.
Wow.
You will eventually be turning them away. So I think sovereignty is a real thing, especially, with the current kerfluffle, like the open AI versus Anthropic debate over whether you would allow what kinds of military uses of AI you would allow, or AI's ability to control key systems, power stations, water treatment stations, data centers. You don't necessarily want that being controlled outside your border, especially, already for military applications, but
Yeah.
increasingly for other, even for commercial applications. And so I expect that there will be growing demand for sovereign capability. I expect that the government will probably respond to that. And I expect that, data center providers will do what's in their commercial interest. And as long as the backstopping and the consumption of resources strikes an appropriate balance against whatever measures they use for investment guidance, probably happen.
Just you deal with all these mega organizations that technically compete, but right now it's so frothy, right? Because there's so much going on. Ultimately, will we get to a race to the bottom in this space in data centers, or is it just a perpetual growth curve and it's going to be like, is there real competitiveness?
Sure, sure. I mean, data centers compete with each other on the same grounds that everybody does. Some on price, some on quality service, some on unique features and capabilities. And, there's a whole subset around AI capabilities now that say, sure, we're not as big as them, we're not as cheap as them, but we have a whole bunch of GPUs and the ability to cool them. Are you interested? You can rent it by the hour instead of buying them.
Yeah.
So that's, I mean, but yeah, I think, you'll find the really interesting competition will happen at the layer below that, right? How corporations or governments, but how businesses take advantage of those capabilities, data center capabilities, the business features or activities or options that are empowered by access to those data centers. And that's the different race, right? That's a race to new markets, more flexibility, lower costs potentially, especially if you're offsetting, OpEx with CapEx. I did talk to one guy who's in a large, probably shouldn't even say the industry. In their industry, they have a lot of people who take money from customers, and they automated quite a lot of it and very AI like. So I said, yeah, what was the economic balance there? It's like, in no way was it cheaper to pay the coders in the back and the infrastructure that the coders needed than it was to pay the people who were actually dealing face to face with customers. That was over the long term. You treat that money separately, and over the really long term, you save money on that. But over the short term,
Interesting.
that's not
Interesting.
beneficial. And I think you'll find the same thing with people, this, and for sure, there are parts of the world that are more adroit about this than North America, but that understand that, just automating as the answer, what was the question again, is not the most cost effective approach in all circumstances.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's so interesting, right? Because there's a lot of people who are saying these jobs are going to be gone. But, the part that I see and I get excited about is just because I deal with a lot of startups, the ability to launch a new viable product is faster than ever. Like
Yes.
you can basically have a very small or solo entrepreneur launching a product that's viable in like a couple weeks. So the new set of challenges are, how do you bring that to market? How do you establish trust so people will buy from you? How do you, to your point of zero trust, how do you demonstrate that you've actually built it properly? Because a lot of this information is hidden and not auditable. unless you've turned like your AI approach into a deterministic model. But then like there's so many new layers, but it's allowing entrepreneurs to open up markets that never existed before, launch solutions that were too expensive or prohibitive before. So there's going to be this huge explosion of new things for us. And the reason why we get excited is we love it when people launch new products and have new configurations and new options because we help enable that. So we're really excited, but at the same time, it's going to open up all these new challenges you never thought before because, 2 years ago, you're an entrepreneur, you build a product, you got like 8 months, 12 months to go find a customer. Like when you built your product in 3 days and someone's like, you built this in 3 days, I'm not going to buy it. I don't trust you. Like, but it could be amazing. Anyways, it's a whole
I'm going to
new,
pay you $1 million for it. In the
yeah,
early days of cloud, I remember sitting down with a venture capital expert and saying, what do you think about cloud? He's like, cloud is like the best thing ever. It used to be that $1 million would fund a startup that needed 12 months before they released an MVP.
yeah,
With cloud, that same $1 million funds 7 startups, and we can expect an MVP in somewhere between 4 to 6 months. And
yeah,
this is just incredible. Like, look at
yeah,
what this has done to
yeah.
access to capital for innovators and return on capital, because we're doing a numbers game as the VCs. Our ability to like place enough bets to be sure of getting a payback is much better. With AI, you've hyper accelerated that. And now and that's why I'm focused on ecosystem, is because you can bring it out in 3 days, but you're going to need an ecosystem to do that and to subsequently achieve any level of traction. You're going to need an ecosystem on what I call the antes to embed standards, to embed security, measures in what it is that you're doing. You're going to need an ecosystem to manage the customer relationship as you're trying to propose it. And very likely what you're selling is not the solution, but part of a bigger solution. And you're going to need an ecosystem to help you to integrate that into the bigger picture. One of the biggest frustrations I see, by the way, from entrepreneurs is, I built the best thing that does this. I need a big company to buy it to validate me. And it's like, well, listen, you focused really hard on that thing, and your brains and motivation and focus is really incredible and commendable. Your buyer, on the other hand, while they very much appreciate the fact that your thing may well be, as you say, better and cheaper than anything else they could buy, they don't get paid to solve that problem. They get paid to manage this infrastructure, of which that problem is a little tiny piece. If you implement that and it breaks some of the other stuff that I can't trace readily, I get fired. So I'm not going to spend my money on your thing. How cheap? You give it to me for free, I'm still not spending my free money on it, because that's not how I get paid. That's not how I get incented. There's a great chart that I put in a blog post on co-creatingprofit.com from the nice folks at Insight Financial. Sorry, I don't know, from Timur Hilchmas, who's the guru in this sort of thing, and it has a list of like a dozen ways that customers receive information and which they trust and which they don't. The number one source of trust and input is a third party vouches for you. And the lowest one on that same thing is you say something nice about yourself.
Where's your
So if
mom
you
on the
invent
list?
something, if you spend 3 days building something and then start wandering around saying, my thing's great,
My mom
people don't
says I'm
believe
the
you.
best. Yeah, anyways.
You need an ecosystem of people who all agree your thing is great, and it integrates, and it solves a problem, and it works in a framework that solves bigger problems in a predictable way for big customers, right?
So, well, I mean, we're over our time, but the one question I always love to ask, well, actually, there's two I want to close with. Who was your biggest mentor and why? And then
Um,
for your
okay.
grandkids, second one, like what are you telling them to focus on in this evolving world? Or what are you telling your kids to tell their kids?
Let me do the first one first. As I said, I mean, I've been committed to community-based research for the last 15, 20 years. And I have learned from like a constellation of people who've all mentored me in specific things that they understand better than I do. So I owe them all a huge debt of gratitude. If I were to pick one example, former boss Paul Kennedy used to, like in every conversation around a consulting assignment, to look at the potential customer and say, what are you going to do differently with this analysis? Like, what's going to change if we give you an answer to the question you're asking? And that opened the door to actually understanding why they would bother doing something in the first place rather than just, what was on the table as a subject to talk about. And that was really great. My kid, I have three kids, one of whom is younger than the other two, and was of the age when Facebook was becoming common for people of her, her and her peers. And to this day, her name on Facebook is not her name. That was my request, right? If you need to play with your friends on Facebook, that's okay, but not as you. You have to be. And, I guess, you talk about, you know, are you an optimist or a pessimist with respect to digital privacy? I am a serious pessimist. And in every emerging technology, I've drawn an XY axis where this is the rate of change and this is time. And I put a dot here and I say, look, here's technology's ability to enable change. And here is people's ability to manage change. And in a commercial market where you have to sell something to the buyer, this is the rate of change. But with respect to privacy and AI, this is likely to be the rate of change because there's this huge land grab going on where everybody is just grabbing what, and not just people, but old people, young people, businesses, little businesses, big businesses, governments. They're grabbing as much data from as many different directions as they can. And people's ability to understand the level to which they're controlling their little privacy bubble isn't keeping pace. And eventually that bubble is going to get pierced in all sorts of ways that we don't anticipate. So the more you're conscious about what it is that is available on you, and you and I were sharing some stories on that before we get started, and try hard to, engage appropriately to make sure that your shadow or footprint isn't too large, the less likely you are to regret that
Yes,
shadow in the future.
exactly. Well, Mike,
Personally, I'm just glad they didn't have camera phones when I was a kid.
yeah, or Facebook. Yeah, exactly. Can you imagine? Anyways, too funny.
I can't
Well,
imagine, and I'd rather not know. And see, that's something I would not share with my kids or grandkids.
well, awesome, Mike. Well, thank you very much. This has been great.
Thank you, Daniel. It's always a pleasure to get to talk to you. And, I look forward to the next opportunity.